Hi, I'm Chris Norris, WHYY's Managing Editor for Community and Engagement, and I'm standing outside of the District Attorney's office. In just a second, we'll talk with Larry Krasner about what the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial means for Philadelphia and get an update on the case against Ryan Pownall, the former officer who killed David Jones in June of 2017. Thanks for taking the time out to talk with me. I want to start with the Derek Chauvin verdict. What was your reaction to that, and if there's anything that means for Philadelphia, and how you go about your cases, or even the attitudes within the public?
Well, first of all, on my part, I was pleased. You know, this was never a close case. Never should have been a close case. It was the right verdict. And also, I think a lot of people in government, a lot of people in the community were very concerned about the potential for sweeping unrest, some of it violent, some of it destructive. So with the word guilty being said all three times in a case where that was totally justified legally and factually, I think that it was encouraging to people. We had a lot less unrest than we might have. So, I mean, honestly, I was very pleased.
Where were you when the verdict came down?
I was at home staring at my TV. I actually was out doing things, but when I got notification that the verdict was coming, I wanted to be in front of a screen and I wanted to see it. So that's where I was.
With the long career you have on both sides of the law now, how many times have you seen something like that? Or a cop gets charged with murder in a case like that?
Well, I've been involved in charging a couple myself. But, you know, if you're asking me how many times have you seen a verdict,
Right.
that is guilty of the main charge or guilty of all the charges, that's pretty uncommon. We're seeing more of it now than in the past. I know that there's been one in Texas, and there have been a couple of others, but it's very uncommon. You know, this is really a drop in a bucket, and the bucket goes back decades. Honestly, it goes back even farther than that, because so many of these cases were never charged in the past. So it was certainly encouraging, but this is such a tiny fraction of all the injustice that's been served up in these cases historically.
What's the challenge? Why is it so hard to charge a cop?
Well, there's so many challenges. Why is it hard to charge a cop?
Why is it hard to get a verdict? I guess you could charge a cop.
Hard to get a
with
verdict? I
anything.
mean, there's many different levels. First of all, historically, very few prosecutors would charge a police officer with almost anything they did on duty. It was real bad politics. And if you have ambitious chief prosecutors who want to run statewide for other public office, they are often very much in cahoots with the leadership of a police union, because that's how you get to be mayor, that's how you get to be senator, that's how you get to be governor. So a huge impediment has been that we've had chief prosecutors putting politics above justice. Another impediment is simply at the level of culture. I mean, the truth is that that police have been a higher caste for many people, not everybody, but for many people in our society for a very long time. They have been a higher caste. I remember beginning my career.
They are, not they have been.
Well,
in a lot of ways, they still are.
Have been continues, but yeah, in many ways they still are. We see that changing now. I think we see much more of an orientation towards equality, towards equal treatment. But, you know, 30 years ago, it was scandalous to even stand up in a jury and say this police officer is telling one lie in this case. And that has changed over time. There's been, I think the existence of cell phones has made such a difference, because even if you don't want to believe that a police officer would ever do anything wrong, once you see it, and you have absolutely no choice but to see it, for people who are reluctant to do so, they're able to say, yeah, sometimes some police officers don't tell the truth. Sometimes some police officers commit crime.
Is it easier now with video?
It's much easier. You know, George Floyd, 20 years ago, there wouldn't be any charges. Without video, there would not have been any charges.
What about today, if it happened without video?
It's still tougher. I mean, if you look at the original police report, what the police were saying originally occurred out there,
Made it sound like he had an asthma attack. Right?
it's quite a bit different,
Yeah.
isn't it? I mean, you know, there was a time in Philadelphia when we had so many shootings of unarmed men, and they were almost all black men during the Rizzo era, that you had the federal government come in to try to deal with it. And the truth is, I was pretty young at the time, but I remember it was almost always the same story. You find the person who's been shot to death, that person has no weapon, but it was always the something. It was always the comb. It was always the, you know, the Afro pick, which was common at the time. Just like, let me get this straight. Someone is running away from you, reaches in their pocket, and pulls out an Afro pick and points it at you? Mm-hmm. How does that make the slightest bit of sense? But they would tell these same copycat stories over and over that were illogical, and that was enough. Mm-hmm. And we would have district attorneys of the era, we would have, police commissioners and chiefs of the era say, good for me. We would have internal affairs say, good for me. We would have the chief prosecutor say, good for me. And that would be the end of it. Derek Chauvin would not have been charged 20 years ago. Yeah. Without that video.
Let's focus on the case here, the case against Ryan Pownall. I've heard people say that, George Floyd died May 25th, and before it even reached the year's anniversary, the cop had been charged, been prosecuted, and been found guilty. Right. Why doesn't the same speed apply in this case? I know there's been some challenges. Can you explain to our viewers what the hiccup is?
Well, there are a lot of challenges. First of all, one is you have to make a strategic decision about whether you can charge directly in a particular system or you need to go to a grand jury. There is an unfortunate history in Philadelphia of an effort to prosecute a police officer for an on-duty shooting about 20 years ago. And before that case even got to trial, it was thrown out by judges because they did not go the grand jury route. So when you go the grand jury route, it takes a while. That's just part of our system. It can take quite a bit of time, and we did go the grand jury route with the Pownall case. Mm-hmm. So that's part of it. But the second main delay, aside from the pandemic, has been that we believe that the law in Pennsylvania is not fair. It's not fair to a prosecutor who's trying to hold a police officer accountable for committing a crime on duty that is violent. And so we did something unusual. Before the trial, in order to have a fair trial, we filed an appeal to try to show that certain aspects of our jury instructions in our law need to be corrected.
Why did you wait until you were about to go to trial? I mean, this was something that you didn't know existed in the state law prior to you indicting Mr. Pownall?
No, I wouldn't characterize it that way. As you are bringing a case, you start to get information on what the defense is going to do, what their defense says are going to be, what kind of jury instructions they might seek to be using. This is not something that was transparently obvious at the beginning, and it also, honestly, is an issue that has not been brought in the past. Mm-hmm. So there was no law to determine this one way or the other. It took a lot of creative work, looking even at national precedent around the country. So I'm glad we did it. And what we are seeing now is especially interesting. On the same day as the verdict in the Chauvin trial, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, yes, we will consider this issue because it is important enough. Supreme Court does not have to hear appeals. They chose to hear this appeal.
And for our viewers, just to be clear, they're hearing opening arguments in an appeal. This is not a trial.
No, that's correct. They are deciding the issue that we need decided before the trial. Mm-hmm. The reason we cannot do this after a trial is because this bad law pushes every case of this type towards a not guilty. If there is a not guilty, you cannot appeal. It's over. It's under our principles of double jeopardy. So the only way we can possibly raise this is before trial. And, that's why we raised it.
So this is even beyond the Ryan Pownall case. This is about any police-involved shooting. If this state law isn't changed, all those cases that come in the future could be jeopardized.
This is about any police-involved shooting and maybe a few other things. But this is about police violence and what they are permitted to do under what circumstances.
So it's a big deal because you're essentially asking for the law to be rewritten.
Essentially, what I'm asking, in my opinion, is for an unconstitutional law to be thrown out. Could it be rewritten? Yes, but it should be rewritten in compliance with the Constitution.
And the reason why this law hasn't come up prior in a lot of cases is because police weren't getting prosecuted.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
It's so gaslighting, in closing, it's gaslighting sometimes to tell people that there aren't two systems of justice, one for citizens and one for police. The more and more you dig into what actually happens, there are two systems of justice.
There are probably more than two. But those are two of them.
Yeah. What do you tell people? I mean, I'm sure you get this question all the time. How do people have hope and keep faith in the system when these types of roadblocks exist?
Well, I think there is reason for hope. I think that the DNA has given us reason for hope. I think that The existence of cell phone technology and everyone being able to video things has given us reason for hope. I think that the shift in popular opinion that is demonstrable in the polls that we've seen around George Floyd, terrible incident though it is, I think that that shift is a reason for hope. I think the talk at a federal level about legislation that would do some constructive things in the civil context, take away excuses for police misconduct and for police crimes, and that's qualified immunity. In the criminal context, the same kind of thing, taking away all of these extra layers of excuses, these extra layers of defenses that are unjustified in a just system. I think there's reason for hope there, and I think there's another reason for hope, which is that the prosecutors who have been pushing this issue are progressive prosecutors. And right now, 10% of the United States has elected a progressive prosecutor, and they have reelected them over and over around the country. 10 years ago, it was nobody. What will it be in 10 years? Will it be 25, 30%? And will they be in the biggest cities where they can have far more impact than prosecutors do in smaller cities? So I think there's tremendous reason for hope. And I also think what comes out of this is that when people see the importance of their vote, the importance of having chief prosecutors who are making these decisions, who are doing things like appealing bad law before a trial to make it a fair trial, I think what you're going to see is they will then say, well, if we can fix that, then maybe we can fix our judiciary. Maybe there are ways we can be careful about who we vote in as judge and who we allow to remain as judge. Maybe we should be careful about mayors to make sure they're going to appoint the right police commissioners. Maybe we can make sure our mayors are going to push back when police unions are negotiating yet again to have no accountability in different ways.
My last question to you is about reimagining police, but just want to clarify again on the appeal piece. The way the law exists now, because you have to be fluent in legalese to be able to read some of these things, but it's basically a very broad sense of when police can use force. And what you're trying to do is narrow it.
Yes.
In layman's terms.
Exactly.
Okay.
Everybody understands that sometimes there's a different context where police are involved. They have some different obligations. But that doesn't mean that when someone is running away, who is unarmed, whose hands are empty, who is just trying to get away, that doesn't mean it's time for target practice on their spine.
Final question to you is about reimagining police in our society. I mean, this case of George Floyd and Derek Chauvin amplified the defund the police conversation. It amplified the ways in which people can reimagine how police exist. When you think about the future of public safety, when you think about reimagining police, what does that look like to you?
To me, it looks like a number of things. I mean, for one thing, it looks like the increasing use of reliable forensics. It looks like trying to restore the relationship between community and police, so more witnesses are willing to come forward. It means reducing, over time, budgets for jails, prisons, for police, for probation, parole, even for the judiciary and DA's offices, and investing that money into things that work better. And we all know what those things are. It's public school. It's treatment of different types, including for addiction and for mental illness. It is, finding ways to empower people to participate in the economy. It's all of that. It's what other countries have done very effectively for a very, very long time. I can think of a country right now where they have 1/9 the level of homicide, and they have 1/9 the level of people in custody. This is a country that has outlawed the death penalty, where every single person who is convicted is considered for parole after 15 years or earlier. Every single person, no matter what they have done. It doesn't mean they'll get parole. There are just other ways to do things that make us safer.
Well, I appreciate your time, Mr. Krasner.
Nice to
Thank you
see
as
you.
always.
Always a pleasure.
Yes, sir.